people.
Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about children's photography. I started in that way partly because all the work that I do and have done for the last 20 years of working with children and young people is anchored in ideas of everyday life, in routine and mundane. And so I like to anchor this talk in terms of how we, in our everyday lives, think of childhood, interact with children, whether they're our own or within an educational setting. And I guess one of the assumptions that I have is that we often will nicely dismiss the things that children make, okay? Whether as a parent or perhaps not necessarily so much in an educational context, but I know, for instance, when my son was very young, he would hijack my phone and take repeated images of the same thing. So I'd have a whole 50 images that are slightly different in angle. I was going to show you one of those. I saved one set, but I didn't find any of the other ones, but I'm fairly sure that there were many, many, many. So I want to think together about how we might interpret children's photographs. I'm a visual sociologist. I did research. I was a researcher at a university for 20 years. I'm also now a writer and a digital activist and continue as an independent scholar. And as Gayatri said, I'm also the director of the Children's Photography Archive. So I'm interested in children's photography in everyday life as a form of aesthetic, documentary, memory, political and relational practice. And I'm especially interested in interested in the photographs that children make unsupervised. And we might think of this as children's vernacular photography. And some of which, some of which can be truly curious. Okay, so I'll start with the lampshades. I'm going to take you through some other random stuff that cropped up in our research, and I'm going to go close with the lampshades and see whether we can through the 20 minutes, do something about how we read a child's photograph. What do we say about these? Okay, so I'm just going to give a very short context to where these photographs and all the photographs I'm going to show you come from. So this comes from a 5-year study that I directed on children's encounters, experiences and engagement in public life that was very broadly defined. We ended up talking a lot about politics. The study was called the Connector Study. It was funded by the European Research Council. And from 2014 to 2019, my team and I worked with children in Hyderabad, in Athens and in London, and we worked with 45 children and their families, and we stayed with these children and their families for 3 years. So it was a piece of visual ethnographic work. We did several visits. The children, and this is a bit of information I always forget to give, but it's important, the children were age 6 when we started working with them, and by the time we finished, they're about 8.5. So one of the methods we used, there's a number of methods, but the one that's relevant here is photography. So we gave children digital camera, Nikon Coolpix, fairly inexpensive cameras, easy to use. The prompt we gave them was to take photographs of the things that mattered to them. And this was a kind of rough translation into everyday language of some more heavy sort of feminist and political and sociological theory, the idea that what moves and matters to us and what our cares and concerns are political things. The prompt worked really, really well because you say to somebody, what moves and matters to you. I realized yesterday in listening to one of the schools that's part of the exhibition, What Makes Me Click, that we did something similar with What Makes Me Click. And then the children individually took from 30 digital photographs in some cases to 400. And the process that per child. So the process we went through, we individually reviewed the photographs of the children and we asked them to select 10 out of the many that they'd taken that they wanted to bring to a workshop with other children in each city. And then we created what we called photo stories. You might call them photo essays, we called them photo stories. So they had to select from the 10 in groups, one photograph, and then tell a story about it. Why was this really important? And then we made an exhibition with all of the 45 photo stories that went from London to Hyderabad to Athens. So that was that's sort of the context in which these photographs were created. So one of the things I'm interested in is thinking about, and these are our study participants. We did anonymous, we worked with photographers during the workshops, and we did anonymous photography, because obviously when you participate in research, it's on the basis of anonymity and confidentiality, but then you have a bit of, there's, you know, when you're producing artistic work, a lot of the children wanted to be named, understandably, and so we had to find creative ways for me to be able to share who the children were, the authors of the photographs, with audiences like yourselves, but without compromising their anonymity. So I'm interested in thinking about, so yeah, how do we read children's photographs, especially those that are random? And I use that as a sort of, as a concept, as a term. So the ones that are perhaps random, that don't fit photographic genres, that don't fit kind of, that aren't automatically, we don't know how to respond to them. So I'll give you one example. And I think one of the things, so if you switch off at any point, one of the things I like to kind of think about a lot is that these readings are collaborative, and of course with the research and having spent so much time with the children, I'm deriving the how do you read a photograph from all of these conversations. So I'll give you one example. Anybody want to take a stab at what's going on here?
It's under the bed.
Yes, yep, that's under the bed, yep.
Chasing the cat.
Chasing the cat, yep. Is that on the slide? No,
yeah,
it's not.
It says,
There's the cat, yes. So yeah, okay, so this is, I mean, effectively, so this is Naguib, this is a pseudonym, so he is a boy, a teenager now, living in London, from a migrant family background, and they lived in very kind of constrained circumstances. And these photographs are indeed of him and his friend chasing the cat, so they had a whole kind of thing. So they were not only chasing the cat, but documenting the chase of the cat. As they were playing, his favorite thing was to do backflips off the top bunk of his bed. And because they were, it was quite congested living, he would fall onto his parents' double bed, which was just at the bottom of the bunk beds. So this was all documented. I've selected the photographs, so these are a few photographs of quite many more. And when we wrote about this, we talked about this in terms of guerrilla filming. So there are elements of the way in which these photographs were taken and the way in which the kind of the story that went with it, that is kind of informal and unofficial, shooting without permits or permission, on a shoestring, without a budget or a grand plan or big infrastructure to support you, which is the definition of guerrilla filming, right? And so that's kind of one of the ways we think about these photographs. But the point here is that I can't derive that narrative without talking to the child and without getting him to take me through what happened. And this is a particular child who also used the camera, and I'll come back to this a bit later, in a kind of transgressive way. A lot of the children use the camera in a transgressive way, but I'll come back to that in a moment. So another example, and this was also quite, because I've picked up some of the kind of common examples. So this is a mix of cartoons from a child in Hyderabad and one in Athens. So lots of repetition, lots and lots of repetition. And of course, children are notorious repeat offenders when it comes to repetition. So read it again, play it again, more, again, okay? But what happens when the photographs are repetitive? What do we do with that? So the sorts of things that came out in duplicate, triplicate, and I'm not sure, I'd have to look up in the dictionary what's more, like we had 100 images of these sorts of things. So subjects that were photographed many times, lots of selfies, television sets and cartoons, sequences of actions and events. And here this leads me to think about some particular French philosopher, Gilles Deleuze, who talks about repetition and difference. That's all I'm going to say about that, and the gist of that being that every time we repeat is a little bit different. So it's not the same thing, it's a little bit different. So we're doing something different each time. So these are images of multiplicity. Should I understand them as a film? for instance? Should I understand them as a kind of sequence? I've often in my mind sort of thought maybe we do a flip book with them. And I think it's just worth just quoting one thing. So modern life, as Deleuze puts it, is such that confronted with the most mechanical, the most stereotypical repetitions inside and outside ourselves, we endlessly extract from them little differences, variations and modifications. So each of these are a different scene. So thinking about these sort of repetitions, perhaps as reflexes and ritual. So are there other ways to understand the repetition that we find in children's photography? Insight can sometimes be found in unexpected places. So I went to the Caroline Schneemann retrospective that was at the Barbican in spring 2013, and I found myself spending a lot of time looking at the piece of art called Infinity Kisses Clooney. So I don't know if you know Schneemann's work. She's was an American artist who experimented with different artistic modes in media, so on a range of topics. This particular one is exploring human-animal relationships, and it really grabbed my attention because there was something about it that reminded me, was reminiscent of the contact sheets of some of the children's photography. And yeah, so it was not only because some of the children chose to make stories about animals and nature, but also because of the visual repetition of the images on display. And so I looked at the exhibition catalogue, which describes this particular artwork. And the artwork it's created over a year, and it depicts her morning kisses with the cat. So the cat is Clooney. The cat would come and say good morning to the artist, and she would grab her at the time Olympus point and shoot and take these really kind of rough and ready photographs. So it talks about as a totemic composition that records the serial repetition of Clooney's kiss every morning within the intimacy of the artist's bedroom. So it documents this ritualistic art. The image often ended up overexposed or blurred, reflecting the immediacy and unexpected nature of the experience. And so I'm really attracted to this idea of serial repetition, intimacy, ritualistic art, overexposed or blurred, and immediacy. And again, thinking about it, different photographic contexts. So maybe overexposed and blurred images might be problematic in some photographic contexts, but they were not at all problematic for the children, whose images were often, we might say, technically deficient. They were overexposed, underexposed, blurred, wonky, askew, not composed, etc. So thinking about the children's images in light of Schneemann's composition helps me to see that it is in this quality that draws our attention to the intimacy of the children's photographs. So the children's photographs are very intimate. They're immediate. They are a reflex on one level, but a reflex of or towards what? What is the serial repetition to be found in children's image making about? What rituals are they documenting? So that got me thinking about rituals. So in terms of two of the things I mentioned earlier, in terms of the types of repetitive images, so selfies, the selfies that some of the children took are very, very playful. I can't show you the particular one that is in my mind's eye, but one particular child, a boy in London, who at one point took at least, I don't know, about 50, maybe 60 images of himself in this tiger onesie. And it was tiger onesie this way, tiger onesie that way. And, you know, I can think of that as kind of thinking about, it's almost a kind of a change in the conditions of privacy. So maybe this is the sort of thing that those of us from previous generation might, you know, close ourselves off in the bathroom and go, right, makeup, this, you know, if I grimace like this, what do I look like? And so he was using the camera to kind of experiment and explore facial expressions and himself. In terms of the television programs, so lots of repetition of television programs. So here I think of this as the recording of a ritual. I think it's quite there's something quite, to me anyway, when I look at the photograph here from Athens, sort of comforting and routine about a boy who's put his legs up on the coffee table and has sat in on the sofa to watch his favourite cartoon. And indeed, I think it was this particular boy who not only did that kind of serial repetition of the cartoon images, but also we'd said to the children, for no other reason other than it was just too much, we said, we're not going to do any video. Of course, you know, they ignored us, and many of them did also do video. And this particular boy video recorded that particular cartoon and then told us that he would watch it under his duvet after lights out. So this is one of the things I love also about doing this sort of work with children. Okay, so back to the lampshades. So sort of thinking in those ways, how might we then read these lampshades? It's not until I bring them all together, and this for a presentation a couple of years ago, and I can't right now remember what prompted me, but I suddenly realized that we had lots of, I think it was after we set up the Children's Photography Archive, which this was the original collection, and I realized in categorizing the photographs that we had a lot of lampshades. I was like, well, what do I do with all these lampshades? So children in the studies shared with us digital cards full of random stuff, including indoor decor, so lampshades, lights, clocks, switches, screens, etc. Random household objects. There is a photo of an electric heater in the Children's Photography Archive. Ceiling lights and lampshades were common subjects across London and Athens, not so common in Hyderabad, although ceiling fans make an appearance there instead. So how and, you know, why do these objects, you know, if you recall the prompt is photographs that matter to you, so what are these photographs communicating? So we could say that they can be read as a commentary, a children's commentary on contemporary childhoods, a life indoors, a privatized life. So sociologists increasingly have argued that increasingly childhood has become much more privatized and far less communal. The boundaries between indoors and outdoors are shaped by children, were very much the case, you know, came up as a theme for children in all of the three cities. And it echoes other research in contemporary childhoods where children's access to the great outdoors becomes, you're all kind of walking on their own to the corner street, becomes very contested. And it's a sort of thing that might create, at least in the UK, endless debate. When do you let your child walk home on their own, go to the corner shop, etc. I know it's different in other countries in Europe. So in this sense, it is perhaps unsurprising that many of the photographs taken by children were of their lives indoors. The lampshades themselves can also tell stories of age, gender, class, socioeconomic position in the family. I recognize at least one of those lampshades as being an IKEA lampshade, IKEA that furnishes the entire of the UK and Northern Europe. The images can also be read as children's embodiments, so thinking about children's bodies. All of the photos of lampshades are almost always taken from the angle that you see. The child is looking up, prompting us to consider their height relative to the lampshades and the room. So, and in our interactions and conversations with the children, embodiment in terms of height was often used by the children in the study to mark the passage of time and to think about the future. So they all knew at the beginning that we would be creating an exhibition together. So they'd say things to me, and children's sort of grasp of time at the age of 6, 7 is different to as we age. So they'd say to me, when is this exhibition? Is it going to be when I'm bigger, when I'm smarter? So embodiment plays a big role in children's life and how they navigate the world. The images might also allude to stories of risk and transgression, and this is probably my favorite. So Ben Highmore, who I've quoted here, who's a cultural theorist and has written this book called The Great Indoors, which is a cultural theory of British homes in the 20th century. He says, perhaps we don't see electric sockets anymore because we take them so completely for granted. If you are a child, though, perhaps this is all you see. Electricity is forbidden to children. If you are child-proofing in the Western world, often involves covering sockets with specially designed plastic plugs. And what is forbidden is also, of course, very enticing, right? Plastic plugs are designed specifically to avoid little fingers, the pencils and pens that they wield, and any other thin object that might come into their possession that they will try and put into plugs. I say this as one offender many, many years ago. So finally, we might read these images also, and I'm going to finish with this, in terms of the rhythms and routines of childhood and children's everyday lives. So lights are significant in marking the boundaries between light and dark, night and day, wakefulness and sleep. They're significant markers of childhood and moments of everyday temporality in childhood, bedtime, waking up, the imagination, dreams, nightmares, comfort, fear. So lights are also often emblematic of environmental and economic discourses in the house. How many times have we said, turn the lights off if you're not in the room, right? And these are articulated both by parents and by children. So I'll leave it there. We can take questions. Shall I put the exhibition thing up?
Yeah, we can do that. So thank you so much, Melissa, for that lovely presentation. So now Melissa and I will be chatting with each other, and then you guys will have an opportunity to ask us some questions. And I think you're looking for the poster for our exhibition, right?
I am,
okay.
Yes.
So Melissa, I think first of all, what's been interesting talking to you is we've realized how different our worlds have been and how it's sort of come together. So the first question was to understand a little bit about each other's practices, and so I wanted to know, in research, is photography a common, looking at photography, is it a common practice, is it new? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so using photography in a research context has a very, very long history. It's within the sort of non-numerical, quantitative types of research. It's fairly common. Although probably not as common as some of us would like it to be. And it has different sort of historical backgrounds. Coming out of the kind of liberation movements of the 70s, it's been used a lot in terms of empowerment and community work, but also in terms of creative and artistic practice and making things, so making sense together with children and young people. So yes, it is fairly common as a practice. I think one of the things that I'm interested in, one of the things we do less of, and hence the kind of how do you read a child's photograph, is thinking about what we're very good at creating collaboratively, lots of photographs with children and young people. What we do with them, like from interpretation to then preserving them, is something that I think still needs more work. But you work in a completely different setting. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the work you do with Prism and the work you do with the educational work?
So you can see we've rehearsed this really well. So the idea was for these initial questions to also get for the audience to know a little bit about our practices. And I think with Chennai Photo Biennale, when we first started it, it was the festival. It was photography, but done primarily by artists, established artists from India and around. And around that time, we realized that we also need to build audience for these festivals. And the way to do that would be through education and by entering schools and into young people's lives so that they kind of get accustomed to this idea of photography as an art practice. And so it started off with this naive thing that we'll just go in and we'll teach photography, and then they'll become photographers, and then one thing follows the other. But what we also realized is that there is a infrastructural challenge in India when it comes to art education. And growing up here, I know what art education was like. It was primarily like visual art, where you learn painting, you learn how to draw a scenery, a mountain, sun, birds flying. I mean, everybody knows this image, right? And of course, photography is a very expensive art. at least from back in like 20-30 years ago, it's become more accessible now. But because we were photographers, we said, okay, you know what, we'll use photography as this art form. And what we realized is that it has another advantage, which is that photography is, especially with the point and shoot camera or with a smartphone camera, technically it's very easy compared to like using your hand for a painting, or using your body to do a dance, or your voice to sing a song, which requires a little bit more technical know-how to the point where you think you're getting good at it. Whereas with photography, when you learn a few tricks, and you can make a cool looking photo, you can be creative. And sort of that was our journey into finding this space of creating an arts education based on photography. Yeah.
If I can jump in with that last minute question, because it fits the what you've just said. I mean, so as I've just sort of presented, I'm curious about these random photographs that kind of surprise our prior sense-making frameworks. Were there photographs in your context and in the art education workshops you do with children that surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, before I start responding, I wanted to make a point, and I was thinking about it while we were eating lunch, is that when I'm replying, I'm actually replying on behalf of my team here.
Yeah.
All our experiences are shared experiences. We usually talk to each other about how a workshop went or what did they do. So oftentimes I may not be there, but they might be observing for me. So that's Sakshi, Uday, Goldman's right here, and other members of the team. But yeah, I mean, I think photography, especially done by children, is always surprising. Sakshi, if you can pull up that image, we can show it also. But because of their size, like you mentioned, and because of the fact that they have not been taught too much, they are more creative. They are more. They kind of have a very, very different way of looking at things. And I think sometimes by learning photography, you are ruining them. I mean, by teaching photography, you're ruining them. And that's something I think this collaboration has taught me, is that maybe we don't need to be teaching them. Maybe we just need to give them the camera and see what they create. But yeah, like images like this, I mean, sometimes they really like surprise me that, oh, this is something that I would think like an art photographer would take, like a street photographer would take, but a child has taken this photo. And most of the time it's the fact that it's their ability to look at the ordinary and kind of like make something very exciting out of it. They also tend to use their bodies a lot, which I think we don't do anymore. They'll use, they'll make shadows, or like, for example, just this thing that I just noticed, they'll use that where there's a shadow falling and they'll take pictures of that. So yeah, children are surprising because they haven't been taught too much. Yeah.
So maybe we should talk a little bit about how we met and started working together.
Do you want to start that? I can add.
Okay, so Gayatri and her team found the Children's Photography Archive online during the pandemic.
During the pandemic, 2021.
So I think we were just about to set up as an independent organisation, so there was a kind of, there was a beta version of the Children's Photography Archive that came out of the research I just shared with you. We went through a process. We ended up with 4,500 photographs at the end of that research. And my colleague and I were writing an article, Children as Photographers. And in the process I went, let's go find some archives that hold children's photographs so we can say something, add something more in this chapter. And there weren't any. We asked people who ought to have known if such a thing existed. And so I did the thing that I sometimes do and then sometimes regret later, going, it doesn't exist, we'll just set it up, without realising quite how much work that is. But and so we were between going from that sort of beta version to setting up as an organisation, and got a delightful email from the Chennai Photo Biennial going, can we use some of your photographs, particularly the ones from Hyderabad, to illustrate some of our educational material workshops with children? So we were doing this research, and actually another colleague of ours, Sri Parna, who was doing a teaching fellowship with us, she discovered your website, and we were blown away by the fact that there's something like this that exists, because we actually have like a hard drive full of like
thousands and thousands of photographs that we've not been able to delete, and we were delighted to say, okay, there's someone who's archiving this, so maybe we can in the future do something with our archive and finally put it up for public use, etc. So I think that's how we sort of came together, and then you invited me to a seminar on childhood publics, and that's when I told Melissa that we are having this Biennale next year. Why don't you and I do something together? And what was interesting about how different we are is the photographs that Melissa presented earlier are the kind of photographs that we would just delete, or we would just say, that's nonsense, like we don't want that, right? And we want the pretty pictures, or we want the really well composed sort of adult looking pictures, you know, like pictures that an adult would have taken. So we were training children to become replicas of photographers gone by, instead of saying you do what you want to do. So it was lovely that we were able to work together, so that and so I think, Melissa, you discovered sort of a new wave of children's photography thanks to what we were doing, and then we discovered a completely new wave of photography with what you were doing.
So I have personally, but also then with the research that I do, I like vernacular photography. I like kind of looking at photo
I think you have to
albums.
explain what vernacular photography is.
Okay, so everyday photography, so family albums, you know, the stuff that you all snap on your phones. I find that endlessly fascinating. I can sit with people for hours and hear their stories around the photographs. And I was always a little bit like, oh, but if it's an art photograph, it's not pure. I can self-critique that, it's okay. And then it was really lovely to see some of the work that you've produced with the children that you work with. And in fact, I think Ariella, Aisha Azulai and Wendy Ewald and 2 other photographers have recently come out with a book in terms of photography as collaboration. And one of the things that really struck me about all of the projects that we have in the exhibition is what beautiful collaborative work it is between the children within the different groups, but also between children and educators and children and, you know, the people that they're asking to pose. I mean, those of us who've worked in a participatory way for a long time, you know, would have said that it's been collaborative, but it's really nice to see this discourse in photography as well.
I want to add something when you said the word collaboration. I mean, this is how I think badly we've been behaving as educators sometimes, is we've been on photo walks where we've seen a great photo, like we can see it, but the child can't see it, right? Like the way we can see it. We're like, and so we literally had to like hold the child's hands and be like, just click it now because it's perfect. But obviously we are unlearning that right now. But we've been in that situation where we were like, this is perfect, they should just take this picture. So not so collaborative, but it's, you know, it's changing now thanks to all the things we're learning, unlearning also as educators. But I'll talking a little bit about the selection of projects for the Egmore Museum exhibition. It's a mix of this everyday photography, this photography where the child has been just given the camera and said shoot what you want or whatever interests you, but then there's also a big range of photographers who are photojournalists or documentary photographers or art photographers who've used photography for various projects and worked with children to create that work. So what you'll be able to see at the exhibition next week is sort of like the wide range of this world of children's photography.
Which is incredibly broad. I mean, there's 20 projects from almost 20 different countries, I think maybe 15 countries. And it's, you know, it's really nice to be able, well, nice is such a horrible word. It's wonderful to be able to bring these kind of projects to a festival of photography in this way. Some of them are projects that have a very long history, that have been working with children in particular communities for sort of 20, 30 years. And it's, yeah, I'm delighted that we
Yeah.
found them, they found us, and you'll be able to see them all starting from Thursday.
Yeah, there's one project which is from Guatemala, and that project has been going on for 30 years. It's called Photo Kids, and just like that, there is one from Cambodia. I don't know if Anshika is here, but that's been going on for at least 15 years. So, and many of these children who were started off as children are now grown-ups, and they're also pursuing photography as a career, and it's been very inspiring to see. Shall we wrap up
Yes.
and ask questions? I mean, ask audience to ask questions. Yeah, so I think we've kind of covered what we can. Yeah, yes, we have some questions. I can, Sakshi, can you pass this?
Melissa, it was a really good conversation with you both. And I would just like to ask a question. You were mentioning about the research that was happening for 2 years, right? In 3 different places, Hyderabad, London, and one other place. So in that particular timeline, you researched about from 6 years to 8.5 years. That was the timeline, right? So what kind of an evolution in photography that you saw, and was there any difference between the photographies that you found at the different locations based on the lifestyle they lived in? And you said the children were asked to photograph whatever matters the most for them. So it would have been dependent on the places they had lived in as well. So what kind of changes that you saw, and what was the evolution of the photographs in the past in those 2 years?
Yeah. So in terms of the changes, it's actually quite a short period of time in a young child's life, so 6 to about 8.5. I think there were also some a little bit younger children as well. So Naguib, for example, was one of the youngest children in the study, and maybe some of those photographs became a little less sort of guerrilla filming and a little bit more still life. There's lots of still life portraiture. We had to put, because of the context, we had to put some parameters which are uncomfortable for photography. So we said no portraiture, or we said you could do portraiture, but you have to do it in a way that you are considerate to the other person's identity. So we got a lot of portraits, but not of people, but of stuffy toys, so probably, yeah, a little bit more considered, or kind of, less wild. I'm not sure that's a good thing, but that's, and in terms of the differences, I think, so there were different concerns. We focused a lot in the study around politics, and of course the period between 2014 to 2019 was incredibly exhausting. Although, comparatively now, maybe it was the golden days, I don't know. But there were different, so in London, children, there was a lot of discussion and some photographs relating to Brexit. In Greece, it was the period around the potential default from Greece from the monetary union, and various political changes, party political changes, and there were related photographs of that. One particular one was a newspaper with the then newly elected Prime Minister from the radical left. And then in Hyderabad, it was the time when the state of Andhra Pradesh split, and it was Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, so that was the political discussion and related photographs there. Those are the big headlines. But one thing we did, I know that you look at similarities and differences, but one of the things we find quite interesting was, despite those differences, there were so many similarities. Lots of similarities, particularly around middle class children in all of those 3 cities. And if I showed you photographs without telling you what city they're from, you would not be able to tell. So I think that's interesting in terms of thinking of global childhoods. Yeah.
I think Soham had a question. Is he still? Yeah.
So, do you think there's a change in perspective as you go from childhood to adulthood? Because as adults, we think photography is form of expression, we express ourselves. But as children, we today see it as a tool to quench like curiosity in certain ways. Because a lot of times you see tube lights, ceiling fans, and probably eyes, you want to see what's behind that. There's an element of curiosity. Today, you see photography as a tool to explore.
Yeah, so I think with the exception of maybe a minority of children, most of the children that we worked with didn't have, weren't photographers from before, if you like. So some of them had photo cameras in the family, but didn't necessarily use them. I can think of one girl in London whose mother sort of had encouraged her to take photographs on a trip that she went to. She didn't. So, I think the introduction of the camera through their participation in the study gave them a sort of permission to legitimate, like children are curious, that's full stop, but it gave them a kind of permission to legitimately be curious, because sometimes children's curiosity to adults is very annoying. And because they were members of the study and had been tasked and given a camera to take photographs, then they were also permitted the space to be legitimately curious. So one girl in Athens, for example, did a whole kind of photojournalistic thing about her local playground, and they were going to cut a tree, but the children liked a branch of the tree, but the children liked that branch because they could climb up on it. And it was very important to them. Nobody had consulted them, but the adults thought it was a health and safety risk. And so she did a whole kind of photojournalistic thing about that through the study. Yeah.
It was so fulfilling, finding out about this week. I'm gutted I won't be able to see the exhibition, but it's wonderful hearing about it.
You can come back, Soham.
Yes, that's the plan. But something I was wanted to ask you is that, both of you, is that I suppose there is this sense of innocence in this, if you call it, this children's gaze, the way they see the world in their eyes. So, has it ever happened that innocence is so infectious to you, where it's like you've seen something, you're like, oh, I would have never thought of this kind of thing, and then you sort of almost kind of learning from it.
Yeah, maybe I'll take that.
Yeah,
and then
go
you
for it.
can-
Yeah.
Just yesterday we had this talk by the students from Prakriti School, and there were 6 students who had presented their work, and we saw them. We were like, why can't one of us do this kind of work? They had taken black and white portraits, and on top of that they had all painted differently, and each one of them had picked a very unique approach that was important to them, very individual. So every time I see a child's work, at least to me, it makes me feel like, why don't I just go out and take my camera, and why do I have to think so much about what I'm going to shoot? Just go out and shoot. And I think that's, children see that in a very playful way. I wouldn't say innocence so much as the playfulness, right? I think they want to just go out and play. So they really see it like that, and I think we get burdened by, it's not going to be good, it's raining today. I mean, there's so many other things that go into our mind. So I think, definitely very inspired when we see children's work, and it makes me want to go and take photos. Yeah. You want to add?
I'm just working with the children in the study, and I mentioned this two days ago, I think. But so for me, in terms of, there was a particular, my own project that I did of taking photographs of abandoned objects on the street. And I know there's a kind of genre within photography of doing lost or found objects. But it was less in the sort of, oh my God, this is lost, but it's more like, oh, look at this Sophie giraffe. Oh, I wonder how Sophie the giraffe ended up in the gutter, and and what is that child doing? Or like sweaters the streets of London are riddled with children's things. It's fascinating. And just in terms of innocence, I'd also, and you can these exhibition catalogues are free. I mean, one of my absolute favourite photographs that one of the children took was this was from London. It's a decapitated dead pigeon that was in the backyard. And it was decapitated. In London, we have lots of urban foxes, so the fox had got to the pigeon, and this particular family, they were doing a lot of bird watching and participating in a national bird survey. So she took a photograph of that, and this photograph for me is so evocative and challenging in terms of all the representations that we have of childhood. There are other photographs in there about, you know, spirituality in childhood. And I mean, these are carefully curated with my colleague Christos Varvandakis, but there's lots of commentary in there that might challenge the received way that we think about childhood.
Yeah, they like death and morbidity as much as we do.
I was wondering if there were, apologies if I haven't read the material, but what was the age range for the...
Yeah, so there were 6. So the premise of the study was children who'd been born in and around the financial crisis. So when we started working with them, they were 6. I had one child who's 5.5, so 5.5 to about 8 by the time we left. So we were with them for 3 years. So middle childhood.
I'm thinking about the work that's going to be exhibited here.
Oh, that's
right,
like
that's
from 8.
range,
That's
yeah.
age 3 is the youngest, and 18 was like the logical cutoff. So we just said 18, but there were children who were 19 and 20. But we kind of said, okay, if they're above 18, we're stopping.
Yeah, because I saw the work yesterday, and it was distinctly different from children much younger. And I wondered about. I'm pretty sure Wendy Ewell cuts the age she works with young people at about 13, I think. I'm not entirely sure, but I remember reading that somewhere. So I wonder whether that features in what you're looking at, what you're thinking about, and is there a particular age where things change, and why do you think that is?
I think definitely there is a shift. I think when they turn 14 or the 13, 14 age is I think when they start wanting to become more like adults. And I think that's when, and also they have access to a lot more information and the ability to express themselves. The students from yesterday, they have like an art program, and they have an art teacher, and they have access to all kinds of, to look at other artists' work, etc. So clearly they're influenced by that. But like the 3-year-old, who's that, Otti? The nursery school. So the nursery school children who worked in, there's one project which is a nursery school in London, where it's more this everyday photography, where you just say, take this camera and kind of go on a walk and take pictures of whatever you want. They're not taught, rules of composition and color contrast and, the things that we end up teaching in basics of photography.
But I think for me, more than the age, particularly in the context of working with art educators as well, I think it's more the context. So we've got quite young children's photographs in the exhibition that were created in a kind of photography project context. So young children can also make images that are, as Gayatri was saying earlier, sort of that we might recognize as art photography or documentary photography or whatever. And on the flip side, I haven't worked in this way with teenagers. So if I used the same prompt with teenagers, take things that matter to you, I expect that the quality of the images might be similar in terms of, they might be a little bit better framed or, stuff like that. But I expect that the quality of the images would still fall within a vernacular, everyday, mundane genre. But the topics would be different, so I would expect it would be my friends, I was going to say TikTok, but I don't want to fall into stereotypes of what 14, 15-year-olds do with it.
Yeah, I think our curation at CPB for the children that we work with is on play.
Yeah.
This idea of play, and then a lot of our classroom sessions are during school hours, so children have the camera for that 1 hour during the school, because when they go back they don't take the camera with them. And they've often just collaborated with their classmates or their friends and done playful portraits, or hey, I'm going to stand here and you're going to stand there and you're going to jump, and then there's this puddle, and it's collaborative and playful and it's fun. So you'll get to see that as well. And then there's some documentary work where children have photographed a banana plantation worker or someone who is a sanitation worker. So they've gone like the extra mile to document something in their community as well. So I think we've seen a whole range of photo projects.
Some pinhole camera projects in there as well.
Yeah, please come to the show. I think, I think we have time for like maybe 2 more questions. Yeah.
Thanks for the presentation. I'm curious to know what's the children's perspective about the work they've been, like the work they're part of, both the research or even exhibition. Like, what do they think about that? Are they even part of the research as a kind of researcher? Like, what do they think about the research they're part of, or even the exhibition they're participating in? Like, what's their perspective about their work or the work of their peers? I don't know if you have some insights about that.
You want to start with the research?
Yeah, sure. I think in terms of participating in the research, I think it gave, like, the meaning of that was different to different children. So some children really, like, it made them feel important. Some children, and I got this through not testimony, just talking to the parents, and this was actually surprising. So children, and this happens all the time, children who I didn't think were engaging, I then hear from their mother or father, the camera is in a very special place in the bedroom that, nobody else can access, or we did newsletters to try and introduce the children in the study to each other and to communicate what was going on. And I found out, so one girl had hidden or had kept the newsletter with her special favourite books, which was very surprising. You don't know, and this is a kind of learning, I think, also probably that cuts across context, that you never know in what ways you've engaged somebody and what meaning they've got and what they've taken from it. And I've often found in my work that the children and young people who I think are least engaged are actually the ones that will very quietly sometimes come up to you afterwards and go, that was really good. So it varies.
Yeah, again, it varies. I think even when we do our photo workshops in schools, there are some very engaged students, and then there are some students who have sort of like, they couldn't be bothered to be there, right? They're like, when is this getting over? I need to go for football class or whatever, right? So it's a range, I think, but I would say majority of the students are enjoying themselves during the workshops, because the one thing I do hear about the programs that we run in the government schools is that this is the only time where the teacher and the student relationship is like, it's pretty free, you do what you want, there's no textbook, there's no like, we have to finish this today, or there's an exam at the end of this, or a test. So they feel quite, and thanks to the educators we have, it's a very friendly relationship compared to all the other relationships they have in the school system. So I think I would say 80% of the students are really enjoying themselves, and the exhibition they get very excited about, because then they can bring their friends, their family, their parents, and that becomes a moment of pride for them. Their name gets to be, printed on a large piece of paper, and it's in a public space for 2 months. So yeah, it's largely been a very positive experience for most of the students who participate. But then there's always some who are like, whatever.
Yeah, I think, and I know we have to wrap up, but that's a commonality in terms of the sorts of relationships that you can create with children and young people working in this way, because we also had this where it's like, we're not parents, we're not educators, we're not nannies in some cases, we had full economic spectrum participate, and so a lot of the first 6 months of the study was children trying to work out, so who are you? Does my mother pay you to be here? And just trying to work out who this adult stranger is who actually takes an active interest and will spend sometimes like 2 hours going, no, you tell me what matters to you. And a lot of children are not used to that. What do you mean what matters to me? You're taking notes, you're actually paying attention. So yeah, I like the sort of relationships that this creates.
Last question?
Anyone else for a last question? Otherwise,
Yeah, it's 4, so we need to.
Nobody? Okay. I just wanted to sort of make a sort of closing remark here. I work with Gayatri, just in case, and the CPD team. All these years that we've been working together, of course we know what are the projects we are working on, and but sometimes there's not enough time for us to really delve deeper into each other's projects. And today I would say,
It's okay.
I would say my heart is full. It's amazing what you created. I feel very happy. Sorry.
I think this Biennale has made us all very emotional. She's like, that's a really bad picture.
All these years, it's amazing that that you've created something really wonderful, and I feel like we don't appreciate each other enough. So
I appreciate you.
I think it's also like bringing everybody together to understand how important it is that children are also contributing so much to our lives, which very often as adults we don't sort of get to see. So thank you. And thank you to Sakshi, Uday,
Yes.
Urban, and everybody in the team who's really been working so well throughout the year on all the education programs, not just the Biennale. So I would really appreciate if everybody could join us at the opening of what makes me click. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, just two closing notes.
I would like to say Gayatri and Prism team has not only done the show, they've gone way ahead of this. We're talking about publication. They've managed to actually publish 2 books. One is Peer Point of Way, and this is Topics of Photography. A lot of hard work has gone into making these little curriculums, but they have gamified it to make it interesting for children. So congratulations, Gayatri, Sakshi.
You can grab this outside, it's for 899 rupees.
Outside at the shop, it's with a lot of love. Gayatri, Sakshi has made this. So please have a look. It's called Pockets of Photography.
And lastly, we have some catalogs from the Children's Photography Archive. They're free to pick up for those of you who are interested. There's a tote bag from Melissa as well. You can pick it up. And we have these very cute stickers that we made together on Canva.
So you can all think about your digital
on our-
photographs.
Yeah.
Archive all or archive some.
Yeah. So please grab one before you go. It would be nice for each of you to take something. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.